Welcome back. We have another great session waiting for us. So next speaker we have is Eliza Blue, and she is a folk musician, writer, environmental advocate, and rancher residing in one of the most remote counties in the contiguous United States, which is Perkins County. She writes weekly column about rural life, Little Pasture on the Prairie, that is carried by 17 different print publications, writes and produces seasonal audio postcards from her ranch for South Dakota Public Broadcasting and Prairie Public Radio, and released her first book, Accidental Rancher, in 2020. Her writing on rural life has also been featured in New York Times, The Guardian, and she's a regular columnist for the Daily Yonder, a national publication for and about rural people. Blue's latest project, a traveling concert television show for PBS that celebrates rural culture and arts called Wish You Were Here with Eliza Blue, was recently nominated for a Midwest-Emmy and is now filming its third season. So we have a multi-talented Miss Blue here. Let's welcome her with a round of applause, and I'll just hand over this microphone to you, Miss Blue.
I'm going to start out by playing you a song because I'm a lot more comfortable with the guitar than I am with PowerPoint. I was just saying the part about this that made me the most nervous was having the clicker to click through the slides, so. I spend my daylight a-hauling hay, hey now, hey now. I spend my daylight a-hauling hay, hey now, hey now. Drive the horses till the day is done, hey now, till the day is done. Done. Work is hard, it's a heavy load. Hey now. Work is hard, it's a heavy load. Hey now. I count the hours till the day is done. Hey now, till the day is done. Hey, the day is done. Weather's hot and the creek is dry. Hey now. Weather's hot, the creek is dry. Hey now. But Jenny's waiting on the other side. Hey now, the day is done. And the day is done. So my name is Eliza Blue, and that song I wrote probably 14, 15 years ago, long before I really even knew what hay was. I'd listened to a lot of folk songs, though, so I had some good ideas about agriculture that came mostly from old folk tunes and from reading Little House on the Prairie books when I was a kid. And that was about all I knew. So I grew up in cities, I grew up in suburbs. I drove through the prairie on my way to get to my next gig, and I didn't know anything. Well, then, by some very strange twist of fate, I ended up in Perkins County, South Dakota. It was meant to be a temporary adventure. I'd been working as a touring singer-songwriter, playing in other people's bands, just all over the country, Europe, and I was really burnt out. So I decided I was going to go the complete opposite direction. and moved to this incredibly rural county, Perkins County, South Dakota. Our big joke there is that we are the furthest from a McDonald's of anywhere in the entire contiguous United States, which is pretty impressive. Our population density is 1 person per square mile. Cattle outnumber us 3 to 1. So yeah, there's a lot of livestock and grass and not very many humans. So when I first moved to Perkins County, I thought I was just going to stay, experiment with, or just have the experience of rural life, like get in tune with the land and then go back to my urban life. And one of the first things that happened is I took in some bum lambs. I was teaching at the local high school, but I made friends with a rancher. When spring came, she had bum lambs, and from the second I stepped into the lambing barn, it was like getting hit by a truck. I just was overwhelmed by this feeling that like this is where I was meant to be. And I've never had anything like that happen to me before or since, of just this deep knowing, like something about this is for me. So she had all these bum lambs. I offered to take a couple because I wanted to have the experience of bottle feeding the babies, and then I was going to give them back. Well, that didn't happen. Instead, the lambs became part of my family, and at this time I also had met another rancher, and eventually we fell in love, got married. We now have 2 kids, and I now live on the ranch that has been in his family for 4 generations. So his great-grandparents were the original homesteaders on the piece of property where we still live and work. So it's a very interesting juxtaposition to be a former urbanite, an artist now living in the place that I do, doing the work that I do. And I often feel, one of the main questions I get when I sort of introduce myself as these 2 different things is like, how did that happen? And it's hard, it continues to be an interesting experience to try to make those 2 pieces work together. And it feels kind of like it's my life's work. So interestingly, just again, as a little tiny bit of background, I read The Omnivore's Dilemma long before I made it to South Dakota. And if you are familiar with that book, they specifically, the author specifically goes to Vail, South Dakota, which is not very far from here, and interviews somebody who's at the beginning of a rancher who's at the beginning of the supply chain of the industrial agriculture model of beef production. So anyway, having read that whole book, I was already vegetarian before I read it. That sort of solidified that was the proper route for me. So you can imagine, again, the cognitive dissonance that occurred when I then moved to this very rural place where the main industry is raising cows for meat, or cows and cattle for meat. Well, what I have learned, I've already written 1 book, and I could write many more, about the distance between what I thought I knew and the realities of our life and lifestyle. And by that, I think, I don't know how many of you guys actually grew up on ranches or farms? Is there a lot of? All right, so it looks like I am preaching to the choir here, and that we know that obviously there's ways that we can keep improving our methodology. But when it comes to cattle production on the grasslands, this is, when done correctly, and again, I know you all know this, when using a regenerative model, this is a way to actually create soil health and to create a biodiversity within this ecosystem. So it's been, again, an interesting journey for me, and a journey that I will presumably be on for the rest of my life, because I don't think there's no destination. There's always more learning to do and more growing to do, literally and figuratively. So, but the purposes of this talk are actually related to a grant I got early last year. And it's going to take place over 2 years. And this is what the grant was for. It is to create an artisan in residence program for short and long-term residencies. The selection of artisans will focus on craftspeople whose source materials are readily available in our region with an educational component that will benefit the whole community. So that was the plan. And here, why artisans? Why did I think that would be a good idea for our community? Well, I'm going to back up so I can read this better. So last year, from 2020 to 2021, I was working for the South Dakota Arts Council. And the reason I was selected to do that work is because we obviously have some really great arts happening in our state, but they are by and large, they are happening in our more urban areas, which is the case, pretty much any state. And obviously we're a state that is predominantly agricultural. So they were really hoping to get me to go out into my rural community and get more of a sense of what they could be doing to support art and artists in rural places. So I've included a little quote up here. Is anybody familiar with Springboard for the Arts? It's an amazing organization that supports grassroots art and artists. It's artist-centric, and it's just a very cool organization. They're based in St. Paul, but they do a lot of work with rural art and artists across the country and specifically in the upper Midwest. So this is based on their research. Research on creative placemaking and creative community development has demonstrated that there is great impact from arts projects and programs across almost all sectors of the community. Economic impact studies of the arts have proved that art activity is a valuable asset to cities and neighborhoods. Well, I think it's funny that they even say cities and neighborhoods because, again, where I live, it's mostly grass. But when I went out into my community, trying to find out what could be done to support art and artists, inevitably, I would say, like, well, what would you look for in an arts organization, or what would you like to see being done by the Arts Council? And inevitably, the conversation would immediately turn to economic development, and that any kind of arts initiative in our rural communities has to take that into account. I guess I would say that's my bottom line, because the idea of rebuilding main streets, that's the top of mind for almost any rural person. And looking at trying to figure out ways to keep any materials in our communities, resources in our communities, because they've been bleeding out for two generations. So again, I know you all already know that. So what I was hoping is that we could create these artisan in residence programs with two different goals in mind. Oh, and here, I guess I'll read this part too. We have an economic advantage in our rural communities because the agricultural products that are already being produced there, we don't have to ship them anywhere. They don't have to go, they're there already. And in fact, it's, again, one of the mysteries of capitalism and the supply chain that things leaving the place they're made is somehow economically makes more sense than keeping it in the home community. It's very strange. So if operators can find unique and regionally specific methods to brand what they are already producing by adding value in any myriad of ways, we could see a fundamental shift in our local economies. So again, I feel like you guys all probably already know this. This is things that you'd be well versed in. But my goal was twofold. We're looking at agritourism. And again, we are very, very rural. So a lot of models for agritourism just don't make sense to my neighbors because it's not like there's a city 45 minutes away with a huge population. Our closest city would be Rapid City, which isn't even, particularly large if you compare it to a lot of other urban centers. And that's 2.5 hours away. The next closest city is Bismarck, and that's 3 hours away. So to people where I live, they just don't see that they are going to be able to bring tourists in. They don't appreciate, they just don't see that that would be something that would work for us where we live. So part of my idea was to prove that wrong, to show that, you know what, in this day and age, people are really starting to value experiences more than products in a way that's kind of new, generationally new. That's especially true for younger people. And what we offer with our remoteness is actually a unique experience, and that's actually an asset and doesn't have to be a deterrent to agritourism. So that was my very first goal, was just to show if we could create workshops, classes, retreat-type experiences, then I would be able to say, no, you can do it. See, we did it and worked. And similarly, I wanted to bring in the actual artists into our community. And as I say here, that way other business owners would have the opportunity to bump into these creative solutions and innovative strategies for problem solving that inevitably, you know, artists and artisans, that's what they're bringing. They're bringing their unique way of creating. And that mindset I thought would be really helpful in our communities. And the other one is what I already talked about, just the simple supply chain, which is that the more we can keep products being produced in the places that they are being produced or close to that place, the better for the environment, because we don't have the fossil fuels of shipping things all over, and again, better for the communities. So, as the last line says here, an artisan in residence program is an opportunity to jumpstart the conversation around some of these big ideas while also creating practical hands-on instruction as to what that kind of shift could look like. So, any questions so far? No? Pretty good? All right. So, the first offering was this past summer. It was a fiber retreat with fiber artist Kelly Nispel. Do we have any fiber enthusiasts in the crowd by any chance? Do you happen to know Kelly by any? I was going to say, she's kind of a rock star in the fiber community. So if you are into fiber arts at all, you probably know Kelly. So she has, she's just a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So she lives right outside Aberdeen, South Dakota. She has a mill, a small mill where she does custom carding. So she has a lot of connections to producers, small-scale producers already in our state, and people who just love the fiber arts. So in addition, so you can send her your raw wool. That's actually how I met her. You can send her your raw wool, and she will send you back carded wool that can then be hand spun or used in felting. So that's her main job, but she also teaches. She's an amazing fiber artist in her own right. She also raises sheep, and this is actually from her. I just pulled it from her website to kind of give you an idea of some of the things that she offers, and that's her little flock right there. So this was kind of a safe way to start, because I knew she had a built-in crowd of people that would be excited to work with her. Again, I was a little bit going out on a limb because I believed that people would travel to get a chance to work with her, but I didn't know it for sure. So there was a little trepidation there, thinking, are we actually going to be able to get people to drive and come stay on our ranch? Because she's worth it. She's really cool, but I just wasn't sure. So anyway, the other part that we built into the grant is related to what I was saying before. It was important to me that we not just be bringing people in using that agritourism model where we would have, you know, the urban dwellers who would come in and bring their money and buy things and be part of our community for the retreat weekend. But it was also important to me that we introduce the community to the project in a sort of organic way. So part of what I wrote into the grant was her coming and staying for longer than just the retreat and offering some community demonstrations and workshops as well. So here she is at our public library. And again, I wasn't sure if anyone was going to show up. I mean, our town is tiny. I can't overemphasize that. And so we always joke when we offer any kind of an arts offering or anything that might be a little bit like, if it's not a sporting event that kids are involved in, or like the choir concert, it's always a little scary. Is anyone going to come at all? But we say, you know, if 5 people come, that's like 10% of our population, which means that if we were offering this in Sioux Falls, it's like we just got hundreds of thousands of people. Just kidding, not really, but that we have to measure our success differently. So 5 people is actually a lot of people. Anyway, we got more than 5 though, so I was very, very pleased. And as you can see, it was a wide range. We had some very young people that came. We had some older people that came. Almost everybody who came though, and this is what was surprising to me, had no no experience with the fiber arts. And so we had a couple of people who have spent their life raising sheep and didn't know anything about the sheep to sweater process and were excited to learn. So I was very gratified that everything I had hoped we could accomplish, we did. So as you can see, she had a table with different types of different samples of wool and kind of explained what different types of wool could be used for, showed her carded fleeces, went through the whole process of what it takes to go from a raw fleece then to carded fleece, and then also did a spinning demonstration. And as you can see, interactive, so fun. She actually got some people to come up and try out her spinning wheel, and it was just a great experience. I was so pleased that it went as well as it did. So that was part one. The next part was the actual retreat. And I had set, honestly, again, my standards were pretty, or my goals were pretty low. I was like, this is our first offering of this kind. Another part of doing this, what I needed to prove to myself, and again to my neighbors, is that you don't have to have like an actual retreat center to hold an offering like this. So our ranch is not like an Instagram-friendly ranch. It's very ranchy. Like there's a lot of poop. Like I've got dogs that drag things from way out in the pasture into the yard. I mean, like my mom, who has never lived anywhere other than cities, when she comes to visit, like she gets a little overwhelmed. Like she's like walking through our yard, because I mean like I said, there's a lot of poop and bones and things like that. And especially in the summer, there's flies. So we held it in our literal, like, this is my yard. We set up tables in the yard. I'd offered that people there are accommodations in our town, but I offered that people could camp on our land if they wanted to, and we had some people that did take us up on that offer. But I also was very upfront, like, it's an outhouse situation here. And so I just said that from the beginning, like, this is rustic, this is rough. If that's your scene, like, this is for you. If it's not, then this is not for you. And so again, I had capped it at 10, wasn't sure we'd get there. And we did, like, almost instantly. It was kind of crazy. I had thought I was gonna do kind of more of a rollout and, attract people. All I did was put something on Facebook. Fiber artist Kelly Nispel's coming for a retreat. Here are the details. If you want to, this is the Eventbrite link. And like within 2 days, I had 10 people signed up, which was awesome. The only downside of that is that then I had people reaching out wanting to be part of it. And I was like, it's already full. We'll offer another one, in the future, but sorry. And similarly, when we did the workshop in town, which, Kelly was already there, the people that had come had fun and were wondering if they could then come to the retreat. And it was like, I kind of opened it up, like, you can come if you want, but we don't have enough, we already ordered all the supplies and things, so it would be more, you'd get to just kind of hang out, I guess, which... We'll go to the next. Oh, actually, maybe I should talk about these. So the sheep to shawl concept, this is just a phrase that's thrown around with fiber art community events, is that you can take a raw fleece and go all the way to, yarn that you'd then be able to knit into whatever you want. They just say sheep to shawl because it sounds cool. So you can see on the table, this is a raw fleece from my flock. So we took that raw fleece, we washed it, and here you can see, I've got my little pointer. Is that gonna work? Nope, all right, there we go. So there she is. I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but she's actually using a drop spindle there. So the participants were taught how to use a drop spindle. She also did some workshopping on like the more traditional spinning wheel, because we did have some people that came that were more experienced spinners. And then over here you can see there again. There's the drop spindle with yarn that was created from them. This is what it looks like after it's been washed, and then this is a carding tool right there. That is what kind of pulls the wool apart. So when it's raw, it's kind of clumped together in these, like, we call them locks. So that was the process she was walking us through as part of the retreat. The other part of the retreat was we did natural dyeing, and sort of same concept. We've got here calendula that I grew in my garden, and marigold, which is a great natural plant dye. We also had, I don't know if you guys recognize, she was in the last picture, but now I don't see her. But Trish Jenkins actually was one of the participants in the retreat who is holding a workshop after this. She's from Cycle Farms. Anyway, she had brought walnuts from Cycle Farms that had just fallen on the ground. It was like all the walnuts she collected from the ground. So that was another thing we used for the dye pot. This actually here, this orange that they're pulling out, that is what we got from the calendula. And the walnut, on the other hand, makes a brown dye, as kind of what the color you'd kind of expect. And then finally we did, she also offered felting, which I really like felting as an entry. It's kind of like the gateway drug to fiber arts because you can use even raw wool if you want to. You can use just carded wool. It's very straightforward and it's a lot of fun. So you can see you just need water bottles and soap basically, and you can use. And so Kelly had brought different samples of naturally dyed wool and carded wool from her mill. And then over here we've got some finished projects, which I think turned out so fun. I think of the next picture. All right, and then most importantly, the multi-generational skills sharing. So this was absolutely the best part of this whole experience for me. This is what happened at the very beginning. Like I was still running around kind of getting stuff set up, and we had one person that was pretty late, and there was just different things that were happening, and I was kind of trying to be the administrator, keeping everything smooth and moving forward and whatnot. And all these folks that had shown up, they just set up their spinning wheels and just started hanging out and chatting, and most of them had never met before. And it was just so cool because right away, there was a camaraderie, of course, that developed. And so there's everyone just sitting in my yard with spinning wheels. It really was one of those moments you're like, it's happening. So meanwhile, Kelly had also brought this loom that, with the idea that sort of as we were going through these different, making these different projects and learning these different skills, people could also come over and just keep adding to the loom as we went through the retreat. So she had, again, odds and ends, like little ends of like right here you can see that's actually raw wool that we put the locks through. And then people had brought projects with them and brought things with them. So they also contributed to make, by the end, this weaving that was kind of like little pieces of the whole workshop and also what people had brought from their home communities. And then this is my daughter and her friend who super got into it. So it was my dream come true because part of why I also, my secret goal is by sort of normalizing these type of activities for young people, it's like they're just going to grow up this is what we do. We just hang out in our yard and spin yarn with people. It's not weird to do that. And so again, it was it's working. Here they are doing it. So, and then this is my final slide here. That's the finished. You can see over there. There's our finished weaving. This is the skeins of yarn. Those were the samples. Oh, and part of it too is that we were able to send everybody home with samples of of skeins of dyed yarn. For some of the participants, if they didn't already own a drop spindle, we provided them a drop spindle, in here. So, and this was kind of a group photo here. You can see in the background we've got our skeins drying. So yeah, it was really, really fun and really, really amazing. But, all right, so that was the happy part. Now we're going to get down to the brass tacks. So the reality is, one thing that I didn't think of, how could I have not thought of this? It's July in the middle of the prairie, and it just so happened that weekend was the hottest weekend we had all summer. So it was over 100 degrees. So you can see, everyone looks pretty happy, but we were all super hot. And leading up to it, as I realized that was going to be the weather, that was the biggest stressor. Because I had planned what would happen if we needed to be inside. I was I've got this big canopy, and I had plans for what would need to happen if it rained. Hello, it never rains in western South Dakota in July. I did not think about heat. So it was very hot. And that was, again, in retrospect, we would probably hold it earlier in the summer. and hopefully avoid those kind of temperatures. We did get extension cords out and had fans like on us. And for the most part, and this group is a little smaller because this was at the end of the retreat, and we did lose a couple people on the second day because the second day was even hotter, and they were like, we can't do it. So that was the like, ooh, okay, good, duly noted, doing it midsummer, not a great idea. The other part that I wouldn't say was a failure, but was definitely part of the learning curve, is I wanted to offer this on a donation basis. Because again, I wasn't really sure, from a marketplace capitalist perspective, like how much would somebody be willing to pay for a retreat like this? I had no idea. Like there's just no way I could make a guess because I don't know any other offerings that are quite like this in our region. And I also wanted it to be something that members of our community could afford to do. So I feel like the prices that maybe an urban person would be willing to pay would be different than the prices that someone in our home community might think were reasonable. So rather than I thought about doing sort of like a sliding scale. I like that model, but in the end I was like, we've got this grant, let's just see if we can do it all on donation. And I told people sort of like, this is the cost per person that to bring Kelly to get these supplies. So just to kind of see, would we be able, and I also said, if we can make back the equivalent of what this costs to put on, then next year, when I don't have a grant, I can also offer it on a donation basis, and we can just keep paying it forward like that. Sadly, we did not get up to the dollar amount that it cost us to put on. So I definitely in the future would have to, I think probably what we would end up doing is having the supplies be something you had to purchase, and maybe the retreat itself be something that you could do a sliding scale donation, and be a little bit more overt about. Again, I told people what it cost, but say like you really have to pay this much if you want to do it, for us to be able to keep holding them. So that was kind of the caveat related to the financial part of it. Now, again, from an infrastructure, oh my gosh, time is going really fast. From an infrastructure perspective, like I said, my dream continues to be to, have these events going forward, to be able to offer them, obviously I'm a touring singer-songwriter and a writer, and we run a ranch. We don't have a ton of time to like set up a retreat center and hold these kind of events regularly. But again, part of what I wanted to prove is like, you can do one or two of these a year. It's a great way to be advertising your products, whatever they may be, whether it's wool if you raise sheep, or I think there's so much potential in the local foods movement for bringing some, having sort of a weekend retreat around food and products that are, raised by your ranch. And I feel like you probably all know this and have thought of this, but what I wanted to show and what I'm now happy to share with you is that like it doesn't have to be fancy for it to still be meaningful and for people to have a great experience. It doesn't have to look like Instagram for it to still be a really amazing experience that grows community. So that was my big takeaway. And what I wanted to share with you. And there was a couple other real quick things I was going to say, and then I'll open it up for questions. So I am in this process right now of working with some different artists on an artist collective that we're calling the Kithship Collective, and artists and artisans. And again, it's related to all of this work. Like, how can we create place-based art in our rural communities? How can we create opportunities to share that work, whether it's an actual product like a weaving or a song or a poem? How can we create more opportunities to share those in the places we are living and working? How can we create those connections with our neighbors? And how can we then share that story with people who are not our neighbors, who live in these more urban settings? So I've been looking at a lot of different models of how to do this, and one route is, a nonprofit, creating a nonprofit. There's some reasons why that can be very challenging and difficult. The other is an LLC. And so I was super inspired. These are my notes from listening to Hannah's talk. How many of you guys got to hear Hannah before? I was super inspired by this like worker-owned co-op model. I think that's really exciting. So I just wanted to like touch really quick on some things that she mentioned because I think they're worth saying again. When we're looking at what it means to create these new systems, I mean, so we're talking about systems change is what it comes down to. And when we're looking at these traditional models, again, LLC versus nonprofit, with now this new worker-owned co-op, I could easily have named this talk Tending the Roots, and I would say that's true for all the work I'm doing. Because in the capitalist model that we currently have, where it's all about growth, again, I know you all already know this, it's all about growth. What that means is we're looking at the leaves, we're looking at the fruit, we're completely forgetting about the roots. And that's literally true in a lot of agriculture models, but it's also true in arts models, it's true in nonprofit models, and what that means to me is the kind of burnout that Hannah was talking about, and again, anybody who's worked in these fields knows. Another joke I always make is you don't think that like being a rancher and being a freelance artist would be similar, but they're incredibly similar because it all requires this kind of hustle, and it requires this attention to like the fruit, but there's no infrastructure to support the roots at this point. And that's what we need to be thinking about and what we need to be building. So again, this grant was a wonderful opportunity because what I wanted to show, and by getting the windfall of capital to do it without taking risk was hugely important because obviously we live on tiny profit margins just like every other operator and similar as a freelance musician. Yeah, you don't go into that to make money. But what we were able to prove is that we could create a retreat experience that met all of these different goals, and we could do it, quote unquote, sustainably, not just from the perspective of not using fossil fuels or, not using like a ton of fertilizer, but from the perspective of the human energy involved, that I could put this on without having to just do a ton of networking to have like a ton of different, an online presence or this or this or that. I was able to create this with relatively minimal effort with the setup we already have. And I feel like that's what we need to be thinking about as we move forward, is not just how to create change, like the change we want to see, but to really be looking again at what Hannah was talking about with quality of life. And when we want to make those changes, the changes cannot come at the expense of like our human body and energy. We have to figure out how we can do them sustainably for our own selves as individuals, and how we can bring in, rest, and how we can bring in joy and the possibility of rejuvenation within the model. So I'm going to leave you with that idea. If you have any questions specifically about the grant or in general, I'd be more than happy to answer. I don't know if you want to just yell them out. Okay, all right. Just yell them out.
What was the name of the collective?
All right, so Kithship Collective. It's spelled Kith and then ship. And it's related to, if you've ever heard the phrase of kith and kin, most people think of kin and kith as meaning the same thing, which is to say your relatives. But the distinction is that your kin would be like your blood relatives, people you're related to genetically. Your kith are the beings that you're related to based on place. So traditionally it would be like your neighbors. And my way of thinking about it is, my neighbors are, there's not a lot of human neighbors. So my neighbors are bugs and plants and animals. And so when I'm making the work that I make and doing the work I do, I'm doing it with connection and to build relationships with my kith, which is not just human beings. So that's where the name came from. Anybody else? Oh, so in 2023, we are going to offer another workshop, and it's with Sarah Miller, who actually is based outside of Rapid City. She's a bioregional herbalist, and what she's going to come and do is offer, the first part of the retreat will be a pasture walk where we go and do some different plant identification of different native plants, and she's going to talk about different ways you can use them. We're going to do some amount of collecting, although Since I learned my lesson. We're doing it earlier in the year, so there won't be as much available at that point. So we're going to use some dried herbs that I've collected and that she's collected, and then offer some different body care, teach tutorials on body care products and also some different herbal remedies that would all be from plants that are available in our bioregion. And the same thing, she'll do some workshops at our library, and then we'll hold the actual retreat at the ranch. Yeah, that's her. That's her. Little Oak Apothecary that's the name of her business. So yeah, she's pretty awesome. So I'm very excited. And again, hopefully we'll see. Depending on Kelly's schedule, we may hold another fiber retreat as well. And this kind of goes back to, again, tending the roots. What I feel like I have learned in these years of working as a touring musician and now as a rancher, that I used to, when I was younger, I just wanted everything. I'd have these big ideas and I just want to make it happen. And I've really learned, you know what? You just have to start small, which is, the title of the talk. Start small. You can have the big dream, but every dream, to make it a reality, it has to be built on these very small steps. So not trying to overwhelm the system by having the tree be so big that it just topples over at the first wind. So on that note, would you guys like to hear one more song? All right. We heard that this one sometimes falls over, but that's why there's the... Oh my gosh, you guys, that's like the metaphor for the whole thing, right? It's so top heavy it could just topple over, so we have to put a weight down there. All right, this is a song. I often finish my shows with this song because I play with a singer-songwriter named Jamie Lynn who lives down in Spearfish. If you don't know her, she's another one to just check out. But we played some shows recently, and I finished with this tune, and she was like, "I think it's your best work," which meant a lot coming from her. But I wrote this song. We were going to, for the TV show I do for PBS, we were going to this church called the Stone Church. It's on Standing Rock Reservation. It was built by congregants out of rock quarried from the creek. There's a cliff that goes down to a creek, that's Firesteel Creek, that's right behind the church. And that's a complicated legacy. And so without going into all the details of that, I felt like we were going to film there, and I wanted to write a song about it, but I felt like I just wasn't sure what to say. And this song feels like it informs, or it feels like a good way to describe, again, all the work I've been doing. And the work of my life, and maybe all of our lives, which is just to be in a process of discovery. We don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. We'll never have the answers. And we also have very little control over the outcome. But if we can stay curious, if we can stay open, and if we can keep walking forward in love and working on building, again, just what Hannah said, building relationships, moving at the speed of trust, I love that. And I think that's what this song is about, too. Speak to me of history, a whispering, a reckoning, the prairie grass plowed underneath, the cuts were made, and the cuts were deep, and where you are, I have not been. So let's scatter seeds, cross the threshold stone, and we'll see what grows. 'Cause we're not